Welcome to Dubrovnik.
To save her. The car appears to have come under fire from Israeli tanks. Well, let's speak to Eylon Levy, Israeli government spokesperson. Mr. Levy, thank you so much for joining us, first of all. I do appreciate your time. Now, Israel and its allies do maintain Israel's right to self-defense after the horrific attacks of October the 7th. I wonder, though, what your reaction is in terms of these reports and people speaking to the BBC about children going days without food. Is there any way that you can think of that Israel could get more aid in?
First of all, thank you for mentioning the October 7 atrocities. I do so many interviews that completely neglect to mention the context for this war, the fact that this is a war that Hamas started with the October 7 massacre, and that's vital context. Israel wants to see as much humanitarian aid enter the Gaza Strip as possible. That is why we have excess capacity at the Israeli crossings for more trucks of food, water, medicine and shelter equipment to enter the Gaza Strip. We encourage countries to send more. Unfortunately, we have a problem at the moment that the UN agencies on the ground responsible for distributing that aid are struggling to do so at the pace that Israel is facilitating its entry. That is why, for example, the Kerem Shalom crossing is closed on Saturdays at the request of the United Nations, because there is more piling up on the other side than they're able to distribute. Now, we are calling for the international community to activate aid agencies that have responsibility and experience distributing aid in other disaster zones to replace UNRWA, because UNRWA has failed and UNRWA is a Hamas front. Just today, and I don't know whether you covered this on your show, we revealed that underneath UNRWA's main headquarters inside the Gaza Strip was a Hamas server farm, a whole computer bank right underneath the main UNRWA compound in the Gaza Strip that they have been covering up. So we think that other aid should be on the ground and distributing the aid civilians need.
Mr. Levy, and UNRWA hasn't responded to those allegations yet. I do know that they've already they've dismissed.
It has responded to
well, they've denied the fact that Israel has been calling out their organisation. Of course, some of the accusations you've made there. They've insisted that they've sacked. They've sacked the people that Israel provided evidence for. Of course, as you know, they hire 13,000 people, Palestinian people in Gaza, and they say that the actions of a few are not representative of the organisation as a whole.
I'm not speaking just about the staff. I'm not speaking just about the staff who participated in the October 7 massacre. I'm talking about the fact that there was a Hamas tunnel with a Hamas server farm under UNRWA's main headquarters. And Mr. Lazzarini and UNRWA staff were invited by Israeli authorities to tour the Hamas server farm under UNRWA's main compound in Gaza, and they ignored that invitation.
UNRWA denies Mr. Levy, UNRWA denies any link between its own operations and Hamas. But I do want to get back to the point you made, because it's important about the idea of these organisations struggling to get aid into Gaza. That is an important point you've made. The World Food Programme has said that that in terms of its own aid convoys, 4 out of the last 5 aid convoys into the north had been stopped by Israeli forces. They've also said that 56% of deliveries into the north were denied access in January, and that's up from 14% between October and December. So I wonder what your response to that is, given you're saying they're the ones who are struggling to keep up with the need.
The World Food Programme organised an aid convoy that we facilitated into northern Gaza 3 days ago. We want to see aid reach people in Gaza and make sure that Hamas cannot hijack it. Unfortunately, our intelligence indicates that Hamas has been stealing up to 60% of the aid in the Gaza Strip, because it is clear that it facilitates and wants to prioritize its own fighters and militants over the civilians in Gaza, who for 16 years have been suffering under the oppressive terrorist regime of Hamas. So we have an obligation to make sure that terrorist organizations not hijack the aid that the international community is sending. And therefore, we're glad to be able to facilitate as much aid as possible. There are now 15 bakeries in Gaza, up from 10 just a week ago, producing bread in Gaza. And they're now baking 2 million loaves of bread a day inside the Gaza Strip. And it is important that aid reach the people who need it and go through the agencies that have experience doing disaster relief in emergency zones.
So, Mr. Levy, what would you say then to the people telling the BBC that they've had to mix animal feed into the flour?
That sounds horrific. We would encourage them to go to areas where Hamas is not trying to use them as human shields. Let's remember that northern Gaza is an area that Israel urged to be evacuated 1 week after the October 7 massacre. We could have gone in all guns a-blazing, but it would have been a bloodbath. Instead, we gave 3 weeks for civilians to evacuate northern Gaza so that Hamas cannot use them as human shields. We know, for example, that Hamas built underneath Gaza a tunnel network 1.5 times the length of the London Underground, with tunnel shafts poking out in schools, hospitals, homes, mosques, etc. That's why we've been urging civilians to get out of areas that are dangerous, out of areas where there is still active fighting. And
Mr.
Hamas
Levy,
is trying to...
where are those areas? The reason I ask this is because we've been talking about Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordering the Israeli military to conduct evacuations of Rafah, where a ground operation is to begin. Lord Cameron, the Foreign Secretary here in the UK, is deeply concerned about operations in Rafah. The US, a staunch Israeli ally, has said they think President Joe Biden has said he believes that it's been over the top. The military operations have been over the top. And as you know, and you must have heard, we've said that at least 1.4 million people are sheltering in Rafah because they don't know where else to go. So where is safe in Gaza?
At the moment, we're advancing on Rafah because Hamas started this war with 24 battalions. We've destroyed 18 of them. There are 4 still in Rafah. And we are determined that the response to the October 7 massacre will be the destruction of the terrorist army that is threatening to do it again and again. We understand that unless Hamas is defeated, we are only inviting another October 7 massacre. Now, that is an understanding that is shared with our allies, with the United States and with the United Kingdom. That is why Lord Cameron, for example, who has spoken so forcefully in favour of a sustainable ceasefire, has previously written that can only happen after Hamas lays down its arms. Unfortunately, Hamas isn't inclined to lay down its arms, nor does it want to let hostages out in exchange for more aid.
Mr. Levy, what about the hostage families? I have to ask because you brought up the fact that Hamas must be defeated. I know that that's what the Netanyahu government has argued is the only thing that can keep Israel safe after the events of October the 7th. What is your response to the families of hostages who say that that goal of destroying Hamas should not be at the expense of their loved ones who are still held hostage in Gaza today?
First of all, the families are right to apply every pressure they can to get the hostages out. Hostages, we fear, are being starved and tortured and executed and raped in the Hamas terror dungeons as we speak. And so the Israeli government's strategy has been to put unrelenting military pressure on Hamas to release the hostages. That's how we got the last 110 hostages out. Because in exchange for every 1-day pause in the fighting, Hamas was willing to release 10 hostages until December 1st, when it decided to stop releasing all the women and children and to resume rocket fire on Israel. Now, we have an obligation to bring all of those hostages home and to make sure that Hamas cannot take hostages again. This war has to end with the destruction of Hamas because the first thing it did after it brutally abducted 253 hostages was to tell us that it wants to perpetrate another massacre again and again. And so we have no good choices or no good options at the moment. We have only excruciating moral dilemmas.
And Mr.
our
Levy,
strategy is
apologies for interrupting there, but when it comes to those choices that need to be made, do you believe that hostage families, as well as the Israeli people who are growing increasingly dissatisfied, according to the polls and the protests we've been seeing with the Netanyahu response, do you believe they should have a say?
Absolutely. It's vital that hostage families speak out and meet leaders around the world and tour the world and raise global awareness about the plight of the hostages who have been denied access to the Red Cross, denied medication, denied the most basic humanitarian mercy. It's the reason that I'm wearing this little yellow pin over here, the yellow ribbon has become a symbol of identification with the hostage families, because we're all worried sick about those hostages. And we understand that, unfortunately, Lord Cameron says he wants a humanitarian pause in order to get aid in hostages out. We wish it were that easy. Hamas isn't interested in releasing the hostages in exchange for more humanitarian aid. Hamas is trying to use them as a bargaining chip in order to escape this war on its feet. Hamas is trying to use them as a bargaining chip so that after the October 7 massacre, it can emerge unscathed and live to fight another day and commit more massacres. And that's why we're determined to take all the hostages home and destroy Hamas.
Ms. Levy, you mentioned Lord Cameron. Part of his concerns, as are part of the Biden administration's concerns, are also the deaths, the tens of thousands of Palestinians who are said to have been killed in Gaza as a result of this war. I have you on the programme, so I'd like to put this to you. The BBC's been reporting on Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old girl who went missing in Gaza City last month, and she's been found dead along with several members of her family, and it said that it was because of Israeli fire. What's your response to that?
I've seen those reports. They're deeply upsetting. I'm not personally familiar with the details, and I'm sure that the military is investigating. Israel, of course, does not target civilians. We are targeting Hamas. Hamas, unfortunately, has a modus operandi of trying to hide amongst civilians. We know that it has waged war out of hospitals and used ambulances to transport its terrorist fighters. And that strategy of trying to use human shields has placed civilians in harm's way in a truly brutal, sick, and evil fashion. But I'm really not familiar with the details of this very upsetting case, and so wouldn't wish to comment further.
All right, Mr. Levy, thank you for your time. We do appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Drop a comment below. Don't forget to like, share, and hit subscribe to stay updated with our latest content. Until next time, stay informed and inspired. This is Dejobnik signing off.